Hello, everybody, and welcome to Profiling Evil podcast by Mike King. Today, I'm talking with Dan Edwards, the author of the #1 selling book on famed outlaw, Billy the Kid. I mean, we're going back in time on this one into the 1800s. Dan has been fascinated with the outdoors and early American frontier lifestyles since his childhood. He's educated and he's experienced in research methodologies that I think are unmatched. He brings a fresh set of eyes to this story, and his unique ability to understand and evaluate evidence will quickly become evident to you. Dan Edwards has been featured on nationally syndicated radio programs and featured on the Travel Channel's Mysteries at the Museum. In fact, he was just on History Channel talking about this very topic. We're going to be looking into his discoveries of the true history of Billy the Kid. Dan, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Well, it's really fun to have you here. Now, I know that you're sitting down in the Florida Keys area, kind of taking it easy at your digs down there. That's the beauty, I guess, of working from home too, huh?
Yeah. And sorry for my outfit. I left all my fancy clothes up north, so.
Oh, no, you fit perfectly for the beach. It's great. In fact, I'm wishing that I had a tee on as well. So, Dan, let's just dig into this. I mean, really, what caused you to choose Billy the Kid as your new book?
So you mentioned I've always been a Wild West fan and love the genre, love the Lone Ranger. Wasn't particularly a big, fan of Billy the Kid necessarily, but I was watching Young Guns back in the 90s, with Emilio Estevez. And in the second Young Guns 2, they start the movie with an old man who claimed to be Billy the Kid. And, guys our age remember that, Pat Garrett killed Billy the Kid and the famous line about he killed 21 men before his 21st birthday and all that. And then he died, as a kid. That's why he was Billy the Kid, right? So who's this old guy that claimed he was Billy the Kid? And I really was kind of perplexed. So I did some research and found out there was a guy in 1950, 70 years after Billy the Kid was supposedly killed, who was discovered by a probate attorney named William Morrison, and who privately went to the governor of New Mexico to get the pardon that Governor Lew Wallace promised him back in 1879. And he's a real guy named Brushy Bill Roberts. So, I said, wow, that's interesting. The lawyer that found this guy had written a book called Alias Billy the Kid back in 1955. And so I got an original copy of the book. I started reading it. And it was interesting, but it wasn't necessarily something I felt compelled to really research until about 10 years later, or really 2013, 2014. I saw Young Guns again. They were playing a rerun. And so I said, oh, yeah, I bought that book. I looked into this. I remember this story. And so I go on the internet and I started finding that people had all these arguments about why he wasn't Billy the Kid, and none of them made any sense. And I can tell you about some of the reasons why people think he was Billy the Kid. And really the story has a great moral, I guess, if you will, because Billy the Kid was supposedly this really bad guy. But yet, this guy, William Roberts, came out and said, I wasn't an outlaw. I never robbed banks or stagecoaches.
I want to just step back. You got my mind really spinning here. Let's retrace a little bit of history and what history is teaching about Billy the Kid. Because you know me, I mean, I'm a student of criminology, and throughout my life, I've looked at all of these different cases. I grew up in Utah, where it's through southern Utah, Hole in the Rock, all these places that had outlaws and bandits running through it. But I remember reading in history.com that they say Sheriff Pat Garrett claimed he killed Billy the Kid in a gun battle on April 1st, 1878. And as I was going through your book, I'm starting to think this might have been the first April Fool's Day joke. Help me out a little bit here.
So what's funny is that you got that from history.com, which will kind of illustrate something that I say. Billy the Kid was actually killed supposedly by Pat Garrett on July 14th, 1881, 3 years and 6 months or however many after the official history.com says he was killed. So, that kind of lines up with what I found, which is I don't want to call it lazy, but there's certainly a lack of primary research by academics. I was just recently on the History Channel, as you mentioned, and they brought in 3 folks that they said were the top experts on Billy the Kid. So it was me, Mark Lee Gardner, and a private investigator named Steve Cedarwall. And they wanted us to fight with one another. Like, you say something mean about him and he says something mean about you. And so the Mark Lee Gardner, who's a traditionalist, he says Pat Garrett killed Billy the Kid. All the evidence, there really is no evidence, by the way, but all the evidence is that Pat Garrett killed him. And so I said something, it was, Brushy wasn't there. How could Brushy know what happened? Brushy doesn't know what happened. And I said, Mark, if you did your job, I wouldn't be here. Which is meaning I'm not a historian. Like, I am trained in research methods. I have graduate degrees and stuff like this. I know how to do primary research. But, I don't dress up in cowboy outfits and go around, I'm a historian. I want to walk the trails that Billy the Kid. I just looked at the primary evidence and I found a lot of things that seemed to support this guy's story that he was Billy the Kid. And so, but yeah, history.com says he was killed on April 1st, 1878. I am sure if you bring that to their attention, they'll say, oh, no, you're right. He was killed on July 14th. Because, that's when the incident in question happened. But yeah, because,
that is really funny, and especially when it's a History Channel. Although I found during the investigation of King Tut that there were a lot of things that history claimed that we rewrote once we had facts to back up what all these theories were. So this is going to be really exciting for me to dig into this further. So here's something I wanted to ask you. Sheriff Garrett claimed that he was in this real hostile part of the country when he confronted Billy the Kid.
Yeah.
And that in this gun battle, he kills Billy the Kid, but for some reason he has to quickly bury this gunslinger so he can get out of Dodge before all the locals hunt him down. This created lots of problems for him, and I just wonder how correct that story really is.
Very correct. So Deputy John Kinney John Poe and Tom McKinney were with him, and Poe wrote in his book, it was a hostile town. After they had supposedly killed the kid, they had to barricade themselves in Pete Maxwell's house because they thought the friends of the kid were going to lynch them and murder them. So yeah, definitely a hostile town. It was a Mexican town. And Billy the Kid was very friendly with the Hispanics. He spoke fluent Spanish. And the funniest part of it is Garrett's ex-wife is from Fort Sumner and they hated him. Everybody in Fort Sumner hated Garrett. That's where his ex-wife lived, and all of her family lived there, and they hated him. So it couldn't be it couldn't be a more hostile town than that. So yeah, normally in the Old West, Ned Christie and Jesse James and all these guys, when you kill the most notorious outlaw, you take a picture of him. Wasn't done. People will say, oh, there was no photographer in Fort Sumner. There's a lot of, if you do some basic primary research, none of that really holds water. The biggest reason I think he had to put him in the ground is Brushy Bill Roberts, who claimed to be Billy the Kid, knew all about all of this, right? And he had to answer the question, well, if he didn't kill you, who did he kill? And he said, no, I had a half Mexican friend that kind of looked like me, about the same height and weight, but obviously wasn't me. He was Mexican with brown skin and had a beard. And that's who he killed by accident. Well, Garrett had already killed 2 men from ambush without warning, Tom O'Folliard and Charlie Beaudry. And but they were kind of the kid's associates. This was an innocent Mexican that just happened to go for some meat from Pete Maxwell that got gunned down by Pat Garrett. And Garrett wasn't the sheriff of Fort Sumner. That's Debaca County. Garrett's the sheriff of Lincoln County. He was out of his jurisdiction hunting the kid in a hostile town with his ex-wife's relatives, all Hispanic. And he kills this poor Mexican kid. And so he had to pass him off as Billy the Kid. And what's relevant for my book is history never says anything about the body. They said it was Billy the Kid. Everybody recognized him. And, they signed this coroner's jury saying it was Billy the Kid. Well, Brushy Bill, 70 years later in 1950, says, no, it was my Mexican friend with a beard. And he's the only person in history that's ever claimed the body looked like a dead Mexican with a beard. So I did some primary research, and the Las Cruces Sun-Times, 7 days after the shooting, says Billy the Kid was hiding in Fort Sumner, had disguised himself as a Mexican, was staining his skin brown, and had grown a beard as a disguise. So in other words, the body looked like a dead Mexican with a beard. And so they originally tried to pass it off. Oh, that's the kid. He's just in disguise. But when they realized they didn't need to keep telling that lie, they just said, no, it was a kid. It looked just like him. So you have all these inconsistencies in history where the primary evidence says, no, that he shot the wrong man.
Do you think Sheriff Garrett knew that he shot the wrong guy and he just was chasing the money?
It's an interesting question. I think he was definitely chasing the money. I think he was actually scared, like, now I may be the one facing the noose. Because it's one thing to be able to say, I was chasing an outlaw, I shot his gang members. It's another thing to shoot an innocent man and be caught for it. So I think he really had no choice but to say this was Billy the Kid. And what's interesting, although these things are pretty hard to prove, and we know some things are hearsay or whatever, but Garrett's daughter said that he shot the wrong man. A lot of other people that knew these folks said that they shot the wrong guy.
Do you think Garrett's daughter got some kind of a deathbed confession from her dad, or how did she come up with that?
Well, I don't know. Garrett was killed on the side of the road, if you forgive the nomenclature, the vernacular, taking a leak. He was taking a leak on the side of the road, and his business partner pulled a gun and shot him in the back of the head. That's how the legendary Sheriff Pat Garrett met his demise. And the guy got acquitted for it. He didn't even the guy that shot him in the back of the head didn't even go to jail. So there's some shady stuff in the Old West that was going down. So I don't know. His son certainly, believed that he did kill Billy the Kid. As a matter of fact, they were present when Brushy Bill Roberts went in front of the governor to ask for the pardon. It was supposed to be a private legal matter, and the governor, you can't make this stuff up. The governor was literally the brother-in-law of Walter Noble Burns, who wrote the saga of Billy the Kid. So it's literally his brother-in-law, and they had made up all this stuff about Billy the Kid. Burns writes about it, and then you have the real Billy the Kid show up and say, I want my pardon. And so the governor turned it into a media circus. He brought Garrett's sons. Of course, Brushy's 90 years old and facing a death sentence for the murder of Sheriff William Brady, which he claimed he didn't do. And he had a stroke on the spot. And 30 days later, he died without getting his pardon. And so, again, one of the things I say in my book is that, despite the best efforts of a corrupt legal system, which was present in New Mexico, and everybody else, like, Billy died a free man. Like he said, I don't want to die like an outlaw by the gun. I want to die a free man. That's why he wanted his pardon. He wanted to go in front of the governor. And see, he risked his life to testify about the corruption in New Mexico. And Governor Lew Wallace in 1879 said, if you testify, I'll give you a full pardon for anything that happened during the Lincoln County War. Billy was the only one with the guts to testify. He testified, and then they were going to hang him. And the governor just completely walked away from his promise. So that bothered him. And 70 years later, living in a shack in Hyco, Texas, he still wanted that pardon. He wanted to die a free man. He thought he had earned it.
Hey, folks, I'm talking with Dan Edwards, the author of, I think, probably the most current, up-to-date, accurate book on Billy the Kid that's out there. And I think the number one seller on the topic of Billy the Kid on Amazon and throughout the world. We're talking about how Billy the Kid may have died, if he died, who killed him, and the whole case surrounding this investigation that Dan did. Now, Dan, if I'm remembering correctly, Sheriff Garrett even had a hard time convincing everybody around him that he killed Billy the Kid. He was having a hard time getting paid that bounty that he was searching for.
Yeah, that's true. And so he was denied the reward money by Governor Rich. And then he had to eventually get it. He had his buddies. So you have to understand, Lincoln County was pretty corrupt back then. They had what they called the Santa Fe Ring, which is district attorneys and the governor. And Ulysses S. Grant, the president of the United States, removed the governor of New Mexico. That's how corrupt it was. Like, the president literally had to remove the governor. So, Garrett and his cronies were basically the Santa Fe Ring. And when the new governor denied the reward money, who knows why? I would say probably because they didn't think he had really killed Billy the Kid. And that evidence would be supported by the fact they issued 2 arrest warrants for him in 1883 and 1885 after he was supposedly killed in 1881. So why are you issuing arrest warrants if Garrett got his man? So basically, after a long period of time, the legislature actually passed a special act to get Garrett the reward money. But he was denied it originally. And so, yeah, it's so shady. Like there's a lot of shady stuff, but yeah. So he did get his money, but he not at first.
Yeah, and you think about this. I mean, for Billy the Kid, this is a free pass. If somebody claims that they've killed him, he can start a fresh new life. And by all accounts, if in fact that's true and he wasn't killed by Garrett, it would take like 70 years for this story to start really coming into question. And I loved what you just said about the fact they were still putting out arrest warrants on him, because that only tells you that people were saying, I saw Billy the Kid and I know that he killed somebody
Yes.
else, or perhaps even continued to kill. What were the numbers that he racked up? 21 people in 21 years, but did it go beyond that?
Let me think about that. So yeah, I'm sure it did. So what's really cool is we've heard a lot about Billy the Kid's life from all these people who claim to know him, but we never got to hear the story from Billy the Kid. He was killed, right? But if you believe that perhaps he survived as Brushy Bill Roberts, he actually got to tell his story. So that's why my book is called Billy the Kid, an Autobiography. How is it an autobiography? If I wrote it, it's because Brushy Bill told his own story. And so it's an autobiography because you got to choose if you want to believe it or not. But the evidence is there. I've given you just a tiny bit of it, but there's a lot more in there that verifies his story. But yeah, he told his story, and he tells you exactly what he did and who he killed and things like that. So he went to Old Mexico, and he was in some gun battles there. He became a U.S. Marshal, supposedly. He was in the Rough Riders, serving under Teddy Roosevelt, supposedly. But what's crazy is I did primary research and found evidence that he really did probably do those things. And I found a picture of him in the Rough Riders doing exactly what he said he did when he said he was doing it, and a lot of other things. So, it's a pretty fascinating thing. You would think that someone as notable as Billy the Kid wouldn't lead a quiet life after the Lincoln County War and after leaving Fort Sumner that night. And he didn't. He was a bit of an adventurer and did some pretty cool stuff. On the right side of the law this time.
So he had a compadre who went to prison, and by 1948, 1950, things start really getting interesting about whether Billy the Kid survived. Kind of walk me through that period of time.
Yeah, so that person was Jesse Evans, the notorious outlaw. Now, if you ever watch Tombstone with Val Kilmer and all those guys, Johnny Ringo and all that, I'll be your Huckleberry. If you ever watch Tombstone, they had the gang, which is called the Boys, and they wore the red sashes around their waist, and that was a real gang. And the leader of that gang was a guy named Jesse Evans, who was friends with Billy the Kid, but they were on the opposite sides of the Lincoln County War. But Jesse Evans was a bad guy. And he had rustled cattle with Billy the Kid and things like that. But I don't think they were necessarily the same character. But anyway, Jesse Evans killed a Texas Ranger, I believe, in 1881, went to jail in 1882, and escaped in 1883 and disappeared. No one knew what happened to Jesse Evans. Very famous outlaw, just disappeared off the face of the earth. So in I think it was 48, his brother in North Dakota passed away, and the court appointed an attorney to go down and settle the estate because he had left some land to his brother. So the court appointed probate attorney was this guy, William Morrison. This is just how life is, right? He happened to be a distant relative of Pete Maxwell, who owned the house where Garrett says he shot Billy the Kid. So he's writing up this stuff, and he finds out, wow, this guy's Jesse Evans. He was using the alias Joe Hines at the time, but he was Jesse Evans. Proved to the court of law who he was, to the satisfaction of the court. So all this stuff starts to add, right? And Morrison says to Jesse Evans, I can't believe you knew Billy the Kid. I'm a distant relative of Pete Maxwell, who owned the house where Pat Garrett killed him. And Jesse laughed at him and said, Pat Garrett never killed Billy. He's still alive. So how would you like to talk about a shock? And so Morrison says, well, who is he? And he says, well, I'm not telling you that, but there's three of us left, Jim McDaniel out in California, and then this other guy, and then me. So he starts digging around and finds that everybody says, you need to go talk to this guy, Brushy Bill Roberts, in Hyco, Texas. So he shows up, and here's a guy, same height, same weight, same knife scars, same gun scars, same buck teeth, same big ears, same everything as Billy the Kid, now 90 years old. And Morrison sits him down and says, I have affidavits in my files that say you're Billy the Kid. And he says, no, I'm not, you got the wrong guy. He goes, I knew him, but I'm not him. He totally denied it. Then he says, when Morrison's like, well, I guess I wasted my time. I'm going to leave. He's okay. He goes, can you come back tomorrow? I need to tell you something. And so he says, I kind of need to get going. This is in the 1950s when there's no, he was driving from El Paso. So he's like, well, just stop by, whatever. The next morning, he had sent his wife away. He didn't want her to know, and said, I'm Billy the Kid. And if you help me get the pardon that Lew Wallace promised me in 1879, I'll tell you anything you want to know. And so he goes, well, I don't think you're old enough. And so he went through this process of gaining Morrison's trust and convincing Morrison that he really was Billy the Kid. There's a lot of things he knew that historians of the time said, oh, that never happened. For example, there's a big event in the Lincoln County War called the Battle of Lincoln, where the Army came in to break up the fighting, but really they were on the side of the Santa Fe ring, and they were just there to kill all of Billy the Kid's friends. But Brushy said there was black soldiers there, and that there were soldiers killed. And historians says there were no black soldiers in Lincoln County, New Mexico in 1881. Well, there were. And the only way you would know that is if you read the confidential court-martial papers of Colonel Nathan M. Dudley, who was the commanding officer at Fort Stanton. He had no way of knowing this. Even historians didn't know that. But he said he was there, and he said there were black soldiers. So there's a lot of stuff like that he knew that nobody knew. And again, it's Billy the Kid telling his own story. And so, so Morrison discovers through Billy the Kid's childhood friend Jesse Evans, discovers Billy the Kid, privately takes him in front of the governor, and then the rest is history. You asked me why I wrote the book. If you read some of the criticisms of Billy the Kid or Brushy, if you read some of the criticisms of Brushy Bill Roberts, none of the things they say make any sense. They say Morrison wanted publicity. Well, it was a private legal matter. They didn't tell anybody. So what do you mean they wanted publicity? How did they want publicity whenever it was a private? I have the correspondence, the original that says it's a, I don't want any publicity. So they're just wrong, and that's what really compelled me to write the book is he wasn't treated fairly. He wasn't treated fairly by the governor. He wasn't treated fairly by the public. But now the story's getting out, and everybody knock on wood, because there's always a few, but I think I have 4.6 stars, and most people that read the book that don't have baggage say, I think this guy was probably Billy the Kid.
I want to ask you about this question because you said he was perhaps not treated well. And that's sometimes hard for people to swallow when it deals with somebody who killed 21 plus people. Let's talk a little bit about what I call suspectology. Who is this suspect in this case? How would you describe Billy the Kid as a human being outside of his gun battles?
Yeah, he's a fascinating psyche, I guess. For one, he's a very dangerous man. I mean, very dangerous, very skilled, very dangerous, very deceiving in the sense that he's friendly, he's jolly, he laughs a lot, jokes a lot. And for that, and goofy looking, buck teeth, big ears. He came out west. I mean, you had Civil War soldiers that were veterans from the Civil War in 1865 heading west. These are rough, violent, grown men in their 20s, 25. He went out there 14 years old, and he made it. He made it. And not only did he make it, he became the baddest, most dangerous one of all of them at 16, 17 years old. How does that happen? You have to be a supernaturally gifted person. And there's a lot of evidence. They're not even stories, but Billy the Kid he did things that were superhuman. I mean, he's chained to the floor in a jail, guarded by two deputies, and escapes and kills them both. Without help, how do you do that? That he's literally 5'6" and 140 pounds. How do you do that? So he had done that multiple times, things like that. So he's supernatural, amazing guy, gifted athlete, in modern sense, but, not necessarily a bad guy. I don't think. A killer for sure. He killed people. Now, I don't know if it was 21, probably not 21. What happened is basically his boss, John Tunstall, who was an Englishman, opened a general store across the street from the guys that ran the town. And so they got the sheriff and everybody else to basically murder him. I mean, so rather than law enforcement being, the good guys in this situation, they were actually the bad guys in this situation. And what people don't know, Billy the Kid was a cop, which doesn't make any sense. But Billy the Kid was a sworn constable under Dick Brewer. So he was sworn in. That's where the regulators came in, where these guys killed his boss. They went to a justice of the peace, got sworn in as constables, and went after the killers of their boss. Now, when they found him, they killed him. So so you got all these guys. You had badges on both sides, fighting about who's right, who's wrong, and Billy the Kid's in the middle. So unfortunately for Billy, his side lost. And most people gave up, but Billy wouldn't give up. He said he didn't want to leave until he killed Pat Garrett. He didn't want to leave until he had settled the score and avenged his friends. And so they had a all points bulletin, I guess, to find him and get him. And so they branded him an outlaw. So they started running stories in the newspaper like he's a villain. He's killed 21 men. He's a bad guy. You got to catch this guy before he, murders the whole town. And I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit, but that's pretty much what they did. They branded him. They used the media to brand him an outlaw. But as a human being, I mean, certainly he was dangerous. Apparently, his father was abusive. That's why he left home. His mother was awesome. His dad was not so much. He was a part of Quantrill's guerrillas and actually rode with the James gang at one point. Not Billy, but his dad did apparently. And so anyway, I mean, talk about a troubled youth. I mean,
okay, I gotta throw a technical flag here for a minute.
Yeah.
Because you're speaking with a forked tongue here a little bit when it comes to the cop in me. And I've seen this kind of behavior. I mean, I've sat with Richard Ramirez, who was one of the most violent serial killers out there, and found him to be incredibly articulate and polite because I didn't see the killer. So what I'm hearing you describe when you describe Billy the Kid, who you say was kind of a nice kid, you're describing this psychopathic killer who knew how to be charismatic, but nonetheless, I mean, we got to call it like it is. He was a killer, right?
He was absolutely. I don't know if he enjoyed it, Mike. So it's funny you say that because in my book I say Billy's naturally friendly disposition disguised very well the sociopathic demon that was beneath the surface, right? So most people couldn't see it, but by the time they saw it, they were dead, right? He was that good, he was that fast, and so people would try to bully him, and the next thing they know, they're dead, right? So that certainly happened. I think to answer your question, I think you and I might have talked about this, as friends at one point. Not about Billy, but it's just about criminals in general. What did he do with the rest of his life? And so if he was Brushy Bill Roberts, he became a U.S. Marshal. He was on Anti-Horse Thief Association deputy. He went into the Rough Riders, and he said, I've lived a good life since New Mexico. So, and he says, he's been a good citizen. So certainly he wasn't an angel. I mean, for sure he was an angel. Was he a sociopath? Yeah, I would probably say so. I mean, I wouldn't have made fun of him, and stuff like that. I think he definitely had a screw loose, and he definitely was a bad guy. But we also, I think, have to remember that you're talking different times. There wasn't law enforcement. It was a duty of the citizen pretty much.
Let me ask you this, Dan. Did he seek his gunfights, or was he a victim of his the ghost stories that were told about him and defending himself? I mean, somehow this kid keeps getting in gun battle after gun battle, and he's either sucking people in, or he's the most gifted victim on the earth because he just keeps happening over and over and over.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, we don't know exactly. So supposedly the first guy he killed was Wendy Cahill, who, he called him a pimp, and and they did that old West insults, you're a pimp, whatever that means. And I guess he was dressed as a dandy, and they thought he was winning at Monty or something, and they thought he was a little too cocky, so he started trying to like smack him around, and Billy the Kid killed him because you don't smack me around, right? So yeah, I mean, he was defending himself there. He killed people in the Lincoln County War because, of course, everybody's shooting at everybody. He said he killed Bob Beckwith and some other guys like that, but that's in battle kind of thing. There is a story that he killed some Mexicans. Yeah, there are a story, I don't know if it's true, that he had killed 5 Mexicans because it's something to the effect that John Chisholm owed him $5, so he killed 5 of his Mexican ranch hands because he wasn't paying him. Now that's some cruel, messed up stuff there. So if that's true, obviously that's disturbed. But if you go just strictly on primary evidence, you'd have to go with the killing of Sheriff William Brady, which he was gunned down in the streets of Lincoln on his way to court, which is unforgivable, obviously. But Billy says he didn't shoot him. He said he was shooting for Barney Matthews, who was a jackass. Who was not a good guy, right? So he was shooting at Barney Matthews. So anyway, we just don't know. We do know he killed 2 deputies when he was escaping from the Lincoln County Jail. One was a bully with a badge, Bob Ollinger, who literally killed an unarmed civilian in front of his wife and kids while serving a small civil fine when the guy was compliant. The other deputy filed charges against him, and it was dismissed. Like again, it was just such a different time back then. But there's no question that if he felt it necessary, Billy the Kid would kill somebody and not even hesitate. Brushy Bill said, "I don't want to kill anymore. I'm 90 years old. I don't want to kill anymore." And so it's interesting. It's an interesting. I'm not saying he's an angel for sure, or a hero even.
A tougher question for you, Dan, now that you've come to know this individual as well as you have. Was he a serial killer?
I don't think so. I really don't think he was a serial killer. I don't think he sought victims. I think that he had developed a methodology and a response that potentially was appropriate for the time, right? I mean, potentially. That he's going to bail you out, right? There's no police in these dusty cow towns that are just booming, and literally, unless another fellow citizen chooses to like come to your defense, you're on your own. And there were a lot of that, right? There were a lot of citizen vigilante posses and things that would, come together. But I don't think he was a serial killer. I really don't. Well, I certainly think if he was in a bad mood back at a certain period in his life, if he was in a bad mood and you were on the wrong side of it, I think he could probably take it out on you, for sure. So is that, is he cruel? Probably at times. Is he sociopathic? Probably at times. Did he seek people to murder? I don't believe so. I think we would have more evidence if that was true.
Yeah.
Because there's also primary testimony for the people that knew him, lived with him, ranched with him, and they said that's completely false. All that stuff is completely fake.
Yeah. Did he commit any other robberies or other kinds of crimes?
No, the only thing is cattle rustling, which back then that's how you're out on the prairie and, there's wild cows and stuff, and they may or may not be branded, but if you haven't etten in 14 days, it was
serious enough that it would get you hung. I mean, that's a pretty serious crime.
That's pretty serious. I guess he was fairly dismissive of it as, we did what we had to do to survive, but it was more than that. He was stealing them. He was selling them. He was definitely a criminal for sure. I mean, there's some evidence that he was smuggling counterfeit money. In fact, there's a funny story. When Garrett had him cornered at Stinking Springs, when they captured him, Billy was going to ride out shooting on his horse, and they had shot a horse dead in the doorway, and his horse wouldn't jump over that horse. So they basically said, "We're coming out, Garrett. We're going to throw our guns out." And they dug a hole in the ground, put all their guns in the hole, and peed on them so that nobody would take their guns. Like they urinated all over their pistols so that Garrett would not want to touch their guns. What they were actually doing, and this is Steve Cedarwall stuff, they had counterfeit money they buried under the guns, and they didn't want them to find it. So they dug a hole, put the counterfeit money there, filled the hole a little bit, then threw their guns on top and peed on it. So they would think, "Oh, we're not grabbing those with our bare hands," But anyway, so he was involved in shady stuff, no question. It was a totally different era. Well, and Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson and some of the famous law enforcement, they were at times on the other side of the law. I mean, back then, matter of fact, Jesse Evans, the notorious outlaw, was in the posse that killed John Tunstall, Billy the Kid's boss. So I mean, it was such a chaotic time with people on both sides. But anyway, I know that's.
Hey folks, I'm talking with Dan Edwards, author of Billy the Kid, one of the hottest selling books on Amazon dealing with this outlaw, gunslinger, really famous cowboy from the 1800s. Dan, I think this story has caught the attention of the biggest names in media, frankly. And along the way, you personally have been classified as one of 3 living experts on Billy the Kid. I mean, what are your thoughts about all the attention you're getting, and all the attention that your research has garnered?
I'm thankful. Totally unexpected. I felt like I said earlier that Brushy, and especially William Morrison. I got to know some of the family members of William Morrison, and And he was such a man of integrity and such a man of character. And the way they treated him and basically said he was a fraud and he was trying to make money, it's just so unfair. So there's that. And then, I felt for Brushy. I felt that, he wanted to die a free man, and he had all this corrupt system basically pushing down on him. Wasn't an angel. But at the time, I really felt like, he deserves to tell his story. And then when I would have never written the book if it wasn't for people making up such ridiculous arguments for why he wasn't Billy the Kid. And then when I started researching and finding, oh my God, if anyone would just look, you can see with your own eyes, like these things are in the historical record and they validate his story. So I just wanted to get the story out, I guess. But as you said, 6 months after the book came out, Bill O'Reilly literally went on national television for the first time ever and said the evidence for Brushy Bill Roberts outweighs the evidence that Pat Garrett killed him. Well, the only evidence that's been presented is in my book. And if you read his book, don't sue me, Bill O'Reilly. I haven't sued you. If you read Legends and Lies of the Old West, there's like 3 sentences in his book that his ghostwriter stole out of my book and put in his book. So it's like, okay, so I know he read my book. So anyway, or I think he read my book. But yeah, since the book came out, man, it has been dynamite. I mean, Mysteries at the Museum has done it 2 or 3 times, one with me on there. History Channel picked it up. I was asked to go on a bunch of shows I turned down on national networks because, I'm not a conspiracy guy. I don't care if this guy was Billy the Kid or not. I really don't. It's just that this is what the evidence says. You decide if he was or not. I don't really care. I could have easily ended the book and said, nope, he's not Billy the Kid, and it just depends on, is it a fun book to read? He doesn't have to be Billy the Kid if that was my goal. It wasn't my goal. My goal was just to tell the truth and be objective and see what people think. And it's been great. So I'm super thankful. As for me being one of the 3 experts, I mean, that's pretty nice. It's nice to be acknowledged. But I'm very clear. I stand on Morrison's shoulders. William Morrison literally committed his life to getting justice for William Henry Roberts. And he didn't have to do that. He's a fine man from a fine family. And so, he gets the credit. I don't need any credit. I don't really, it's really, just look at the facts and see what it is. But yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. It's nice. I got to meet cool people like you,
I'll tell you what, I have so much appreciated our friendship. Folks, you can get Billy the Kid at Amazon. And I want to just share a couple of lines that I really liked, Dan, and I hope you don't mind. But regarding Billy the Kid, it was a moonlit night in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, when history tells us that Sheriff Pat Garrett shot down the notorious outlaw Billy the Kid. Newspapers across the country quickly reported that the kid was dead, and Garrett quickly put the body in the ground. But rumors spread that the kid had survived, and the testimony of Garrett's posse was contradictory about how exactly the shooting happened. Nevertheless, without evidence, the sheriff took the claim and the glory for nearly 70 years. And now, in the book, Billy the Kid, Dan Edwards uncovers the real story behind whether Billy the Kid survived. And all evidence points, Dan, that he did in fact survive. And I just would like to maybe close with what it would have been like for you to meet him at 90 and what questions you would have had. Because I'll tell you what, I've talked to a lot of killers in my life, and I found it to be intriguing, but there are none of them that I would have wanted to hang out with when they were back in business. What would your questions have been for the kid at age 90?
Wow, what a great question. The way I think my brain is wired, I would have asked him very specific questions so I could go verify it in the historical record. I would have said, what exact alias did you use? Where were you on this date? How did this happen? What caliber rifle did you use? Like, I would have gotten into the detail, which is the approach I took into my book. So I would have looked for evidences, right, that could have been proven or disproven. That's how my brain works. However, what's interesting is the other side of it is that Garrett killed him. There's no evidence. It's literally, he said so. Like, so, Brushy has all of his evidence, including sworn affidavits and height and weight and all that stuff and all the things in the historical record. So, we'll consider that maybe that's true. What's the other option? The other option is Garrett said so. That's literally. So I would have asked him a lot about, Garrett and specifics and what was the name of this guy's horse, stuff like that. But, I also would have loved to clarify genealogy. It's a big thing. Are you Brushy Bill? He later in life, he took the identity of a cousin. And it's a big point of debate. The cousin was born in 1879, 20 years. He would have been 20 years younger. So was he 70 or was he 90? Big obvious thing is the cousin was a farmer his whole life. And Brushy Bill had gunshot wounds and everything. So, I mean, he clearly wasn't a farmer. And there's discrepancies in the historical record that support Brushy's story that he stole his identity. But anyway, I would have loved to nail his genealogy because in the beginning with Morrison, he was lying. He didn't want to hang. And so he would dodge things. He didn't admit to killing anybody. He wanted a pardon. He didn't want to admit all the bad stuff that he did, that he could also be hanged for. So he was very evasive. There were some problems in the beginning. But one thing you may find interesting is he said that, he's William Bonney, right? And he said his mom was Catherine Bonney. And he had told Morrison originally, she's not my mom, she's my aunt, right? And this goes to your point about being an outlaw, which I thought this is really interesting, and I hope you like it too. He said, no, she was my aunt, Bonnie. That's where I got the name Bonnie. Well, so that's what he went with, right? And Morrison wrote that in his book. But at the very end, I have a document no one's ever seen. It's a correspondence between Morrison and Brushy Bill. After he had his stroke and he's recovering in Hyco, Texas, he's about to die. He just doesn't know it. And he writes Morrison, says, I got to come clean on some stuff. I want to hire this local lady to write everything down. And Morrison says, just wait, I'm coming. I'll record it on a tape recorder. I have to hire the lady. Well, Brushy died before he could record it. So all that stuff we could have asked, all that stuff we could have understood, right? But the one thing he wrote right before he died, he said, I want to tell you how I got the name Bonnie. And Morrison says, don't worry, you can tell me when I get there, or something to that effect. So Brushy doesn't want to let it go. And these are letters. He mails it. You got to wait a few days. He responds. You got to wait a few days, write another one. So he says, no, I want to tell you how I got the name Bonnie. Belle Starr gave it to me. It's my outlaw name. And so Belle Starr was the queen of the bandits. She did the Robber's Roost and all that, she was with Jesse James and all that. Well, Brushy Bill, before he was Billy the Kid, said that he was a lookout for Belle Starr. And she wanted him to be an outlaw, and she gave him the name Billy Bonney as an alias. And so so all these guys are looking for like William Bonney in the New York census because he doesn't exist. And so everybody's looking for this genealogy that doesn't exist because Belle Starr gave him that name. And literally before I revealed that, no one had ever heard that before. And the only reason we know it now is because I found the letter between Morrison and Roberts, and I did primary research that says Belle Starr gave me that name. So I think that it's fun stuff, man, and very interesting to me. I don't know if it's interesting to everybody else, but so far so good.
Well, I think it is interesting because it continues to sit at the top of the charts when people are looking for Billy the Kid. So folks, please go out to Amazon and get Billy the Kid by Daniel Edwards. Dan, I can't thank you enough for our friendship, for taking time today, and for your mentorship as we've worked together on other projects. It's really been fun, and I really appreciate the relationship.
Thank you, Mike. I feel exactly the same way. I appreciate you.
Well, folks, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil and subscribing on whatever your favorite podcast platform is. And make sure you check out the video portion of this at Profiling Evil on YouTube. And from all of us at Profiling Evil, thanks so much for your support. We'll see you at the next crime scene.